My daughter-in-law treated my car, my home, and even my time as if they belonged to her. But when a mechanic revealed what she had secretly asked him to do, I realized she didn't just want to borrow my car, she had planned to take it for good. The silver keys sat right beside my morning coffee. I was sipping dark roast, watching sunrise over the pine trees in our quiet Spokane neighborhood, when Boots stomped into my kitchen. My daughter-in-law, Heather, did not bother saying good morning. She reached directly across my placemat, her long acrylic nails clicking against the polished quartz. Her eyes were fixed on the fob of my 2021 Ford Escape. "I need your car more than you do," Heather announced, her voice sharp and hurried. I pulled the keys back, smoothly, dropping them into my cardigan pocket before her fingers could close around the ring. I looked up at her face, fresh, with full makeup, at 7 in the morning. "Then buy one yourself," I replied softly. Heather froze, her hand still hovering in the air. A dark flush crept up her neck. She had expected me to hand them over just like I used to lend my vacuum, my lawnmower, or my time watching her golden retriever. For the past 6 months since she burnt out the transmission on her own sedan through neglected maintenance, my driveway had become her personal rental lot. "You just stay home all day, Evelyn," she snapped, crossing her arms. "You're retired. I actually have client meetings across town today. Brandon promised me yesterday that you wouldn't mind." I took another slow sip of my coffee. My son Brandon had no right promising my vehicle to anyone. I spent 35 years working as a postal clerk, standing on concrete floors to earn my pension and pay off this car. It was not a community asset. "Brandon does not own this car," I said, setting my mug down with a firm click. "I am driving into town at 9 to deliver my hand-knitted blankets to the children's shelter. The keys stay with me." Heather glared at me, turned on her heel, and slammed the front door so hard the glass pane rattled. The silence in the house after Heather left was heavy, but it was not unfamiliar. This boundary had been eroding for over a year. Ever since Brandon married Heather and bought the smaller bungalow 2 streets over my home, had slowly been treated as an annex to theirs. They dropped off laundry when their machine broke borrowed tools without returning them, and assumed my time was entirely free. At 10 that morning, after dropping the fleece blankets at the shelter, I stopped by the local hardware store. I bought a heavy-duty deadbolt for my garage side door and a small key lockbox for my porch. I was 66 years old, in good health, and fully capable of maintaining my independence. But I realized I had allowed my kindness to be mistaken for passivity. Around noon, Brandon called my cell phone while I was trimming the hydrangeas in the front yard. His tone was stress, the familiar sound of a husband caught between his mother and an angry wife. "Mom, why didn't you let Heather take the Ford?" Brandon asked, sighing into the receiver. "She had to take a surge-priced rideshare to work. It cost her $40. She's furious." "I had errands of my own, Brandon," I said calmly, holding the phone with my shoulder as I wiped sap from my shears. "And your wife did not ask. She demanded. She's just under a lot of pressure with her new real estate job," he defended. "You could have rescheduled your shelter drop-off. It's not like those blankets were an emergency." That statement cut deeper than Heather's rudeness. Brandon knew how much that volunteer work meant to me after his father passed away 3 years ago. It gave my week structure and purpose. "My plans matter just as much as hers," I said firmly. "If Heather needs reliable transportation for her career, you two need to figure out your household budget." He fell silent for a moment before hanging up with a curt goodbye. On Thursday morning, I began changing my weekly routine. Usually I left my back door unlocked so Brandon could drop off his dry cleaning or borrow the pressure washer whenever he wanted. Today, I turned the new deadbolts from the inside. I also drove my car into the garage and pulled the automatic door down, keeping the vehicle entirely out of sight from the street. At 2 in the afternoon, I heard someone rattle the back doorknob. I peered through the kitchen window and saw Heather standing on the porch holding 2 large tote bags of winter clothes. She knocked twice, hard and impatient. When I opened the door just a few inches staying behind the screen, her eyebrows pulled together in annoyance. "Why is the door locked?" she asked, shifting the heavy bags in her arms. "I brought over these coats to store in your basement closet. Our spare room is full. I am reorganizing the basement this month, Heather," I said, keeping my voice even. "I don't have space for extra storage right now." She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "It's just 3 bags, Evelyn. You have a 4-bedroom house all to yourself. It doesn't make sense for you to hoard all that space when we need it." "It is my space to manage," I replied. "You might want to look into a small storage unit near your office." "Are you serious?" Heather's tone turned sharp again. "You're being completely unreasonable lately. First the car, now this. We're family." "Family respects boundaries," I said gently. "I'm heading out for a walk now, so I need to lock up." She stood on the porch for a moment, her jaw tight before hauling her bags back toward her car, a loaner vehicle her parents had dropped off that morning. She didn't offer a goodbye. I snapped the lock into place, feeling a small, solid weight settle in my chest. I was no longer accepting convenience as a substitute for respect. By the weekend, the tension had reached the rest of our small social circle. I attended the neighborhood potluck at the community center on Saturday evening, bringing my signature apple crisp. As I set the dish on the long table, my neighbor Martha walked over, holding a paper plate. "Evelyn," Martha said quietly, leaning in. "I saw Heather at the grocery store yesterday. She was telling Sarah from down the street that you were making things difficult for them during their financial transition." I kept my hands steady as I smoothed the tablecloth. "Did she specify how?" "She mentioned you refused to help them with transportation while her car was in the shop." Martha admitted, looking uncomfortable. "She said you were letting your car sit in the garage, doing nothing." I took a slow breath. It was easy for Heather to frame my refusal as cruelty while leaving out her own entitlement. "My car is my only way to get to my medical appointments, my volunteer work, and my grocery shopping." "Martha, I am happy to help in a real emergency, but not as a permanent substitute for their own planning." Martha nodded, slowly, understanding the unspoken details. "I thought there was more to the story." "You've always been generous." Later that evening, Brandon called again. This time, he sounded exhausted rather than angry. He admitted that Heather's loaner car from her parents had to be returned by Monday, and they couldn't afford a second auto loan payment right now because of their credit card debt. "Mom, we really are in a tight spot," Brandon said quietly. "Could we just rent your car from you $50 a week? $50 a week wouldn't even cover the depreciation, let alone the insurance risk of Heather driving it aggressively." "No, Brandon," I said clearly. "I am not a rental agency. You need to look at selling her current car for parts, or taking the public bus route that stops right at the end of your street." On Tuesday afternoon, I drove to the local auto repair shop on 4th Street to get an oil change. The owner, a man named Frank, who had serviced my late husband's trucks for 20 years, came out to the waiting room with a clipboard. "Hey, Evelyn," Frank said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Quick question for you. Is your son still driving that blue sedan?" "That's Heather's car," I corrected him. "Why do you ask?" Frank sighed and leaned against the counter. "She brought it in 2 weeks ago with a completely blown head gasket. I gave her an estimate to fix it, but she told me to just leave it parked in my back lot. until she figured out a way to get her mother-in-law to buy it off her. My stomach tightened. She said what? She asked if I could write up an official statement saying the car was a total loss, so she could convince you that she needed a new vehicle. Frank said, looking genuinely apologetic. I told her I don't do fake paperwork. She got mad and walked out. The car is still sitting in my lot, gathering dust. The picture became entirely clear. Heather hadn't just been caught in an unfortunate breakdown. She had actively planned to leverage her situation to pressure me into handing over my Ford Escape permanently or buying her a replacement. She had lied to Brandon about the repairs being impossible, and she had lied about her timeline. I felt a sharp pang of disappointment, not just at Heather's deceit, but at Brandon's blind willingness to go along with her narratives without checking the facts himself. Thank you for telling me, Frank, I said, keeping my voice steady. Please charge her the daily storage fee for leaving the car on your lot. Already am, Frank replied with a small nod. Thought you ought to know what was going on. I paid for my oil change and sat in my car for 5 minutes, letting the clarity wash over me. Instead of going home to brood, I drove straight to the bank. I met with my financial advisor, a sensible woman named Karen, who had helped me manage my pension since my husband passed away. Karen, I said, sitting down across from her desk. I want to review my auto insurance policy and my property title. We went over the paperwork together. I discovered that 3 years ago, when Brandon was helping me organize my accounts after his father died, he had added his name as a secondary driver on my auto policy to lower his own rates. It was a detail I had forgotten in my grief. If he is on the policy, he technically has permission to operate the vehicle, Karen explained. And if his wife drives it with his permission, your insurance could be held liable in an accident. Remove him today, I instructed immediately. Update the policy so that I am the sole named driver on the vehicle. If anyone else drives it, the coverage is void. Understood, Karen said, typing the changes into her computer. Next, I went to the State Department of Licensing office downtown. I paid a small fee to issue a fresh title certificate solely under my name, ensuring there were no loose ends or shared claims on my vehicle. On my way home, I made one final stop at a local printing shop. I had them print a clear professional sign for my driveway private property. No unauthorized parking or storage. When I pulled back into my garage, I locked the heavy side door, took the spare set of car keys out of my kitchen drawer, and placed them inside a fireproof safe in my bedroom closet. The combination belonged to me alone. I was not building a fortress out of anger. I was simply securing the life I had worked 40 years to build. I prepared my dinner, ate in peace, and watched the evening news without checking my phone once. On Thursday morning, the situation escalated exactly as I anticipated. I was in the front yard planting tulip bulbs when a yellow cab pulled up to my curb. Heather stepped out wearing a tailored business suit, holding a large leather briefcase. She looked visibly stressed and paid the driver with a crumpled bill. She walked up my driveway with heavy steps, her eyes fixed on me. Evelyn, she began, not bothering with pleasantries. I have a presentation with an investor in 45 minutes across the valley. The bus route takes over an hour and a half and my Uber app is glitched. I need the escape. Now. I told you on Monday, Heather. My car is not available, I said calmly, placing another bulb into the dark soil. This is my career on the line, she yelled, her voice dropping all pretense of politeness. You're sitting here digging in the dirt while your family is struggling. What kind of mother-in-law acts like this? Brandon's truck pulled up behind the cab. He hopped out looking frantic. He had obviously taken time off work to resolve another one of Heather's morning emergencies. Mom, please, Brandon pleaded, rushing up the lawn. Just give her the keys for 3 hours. I'll drive her myself if you don't trust her with the car. We can't afford for her to miss this meeting. Brandon. I stood up, dusting the dirt off my knees, and looked my son dead in the eye. Frank from the auto shop called me 2 days ago. Brandon froze. Heather's eyes went wide, her lips pressing into a thin white line. He told me about the fake estimate she asked for. I continued, keeping my voice cold and clear. She didn't suffer an unexpected breakdown. She neglected her vehicle, lied about the repair costs, and tried to manipulate me into giving up mine. And you didn't even bother to verify the truth before demanding I hand over my keys. The silence on the front lawn was absolute. A light autumn breeze rattled the leaves of the maple tree above us. Brandon turned slowly to look at his wife, the confusion on his face shifting to deep embarrassment. Heather. Brandon asked, his voice shaking slightly. Is that true? Frank said that. Heather crossed her arms, defensively looking away toward the street. Frank is an old friend of your mother's. He's taking her side. My car needs a new engine, Brandon. It's not worth fixing. That wasn't the point, I interrupted firmly. You asked him to falsify documents to trick me. You lied to your husband, and you tried to take advantage of an older woman who opened her home to you. Brandon looked down at the grass, his shoulders slumping. For months, he had been trying to keep the peace by appeasing Heather's endless demands, sweeping her hostility toward me under the rug to avoid arguments at home. Now, he couldn't hide behind neutrality anymore. Mom. Brandon started, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know about Frank. I swear I didn't. You didn't know because you didn't care to look, I said, showing no anger, only absolute clarity. You were happy to let your wife treat me like a free service as long as it kept her quiet. But that ends today. I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my sweater pocket, the updated insurance declaration showing Brandon had been removed from the policy. I handed it to him. If either of you touches my vehicle, you will be driving without insurance, and I will report it immediately, I said. Now please leave my property. Heather has a meeting to catch, and you both have a lot to talk about. Heather glared at me with pure venom, turned around, and marched back toward Brandon's truck. Brandon stood there for a moment, looking at the paper in his hands before quietly following her. The ultimate test came 3 days later on Sunday evening. I was sitting on my back porch reading a book when Brandon walked around the side of the house alone. He looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes, but his posture was different, less defensive, more grounded. He sat down on the wooden bench across from me. We talked, he said simply, for 3 days straight. I stayed quiet, letting him speak. Heather admitted to what she did at the shop. Brandon continued, looking out over the yard. She thought if she made her car situation look hopeless, you would just give her your escape and buy yourself a smaller used sedan. She thought you had extra savings you were just holding on to. And what did you tell her? I asked. I told her she was completely out of line. Brandon said, his voice firm. I told her we are moving out of our current place into a smaller apartment next month so we can pay off our debts. She took her car back from Frank's lot and sold it to a junkyard for scrap value. She's taking the bus to work starting tomorrow. I took a slow breath, feeling a profound sense of relief. Not because Heather was suffering, but because my son had finally stopped enabling the behavior that was destroying his own integrity and our relationship. I'm sorry, Mom, Brandon added, looking at me directly. I let her treat you like an afterthought because it was easier than fighting with her. I failed you as a son. You made a mistake, Brandon, I corrected him gently. But you are fixing it now. That is what matters. He offered a small, tired smile. He didn't ask for the car. He didn't ask for money. For the first time in 2 years, he was taking responsibility for his own household. 6 months later, spring had arrived in Spokane. My garden was full of blooming purple irises and bright yellow daffodils. My life had settled into a wonderful, steady rhythm. Removing the constant demands from my daily routine freed up energy I hadn't realized I was losing. I joined a weekly hiking club at the local community center, taking morning trips up Mount Spokane with a group of women my own age. My Ford Escape was parked safely in the garage, ready whenever I wanted to take a weekend drive down the Columbia River Gorge. Brandon and Heather moved into their new apartment downtown in February. The transition wasn't easy for them, but it was necessary. Heather had to adapt to riding the city transit system, which forced her to manage her time and budget with real discipline. The entitlement that had previously defined her interactions with me began to fade, replaced by a cautious, distant respect. They came over for Sunday dinner once a month now. Heather no longer searched my kitchen counters for keys or dropped off her dry cleaning in my hallway. When she entered my home, she brought a small bouquet of flowers or a loaf of fresh bread, and she used the front door like a proper guest. Last Sunday, as we finished eating dinner on the back patio, Heather looked over at my car sitting clean and washed in the driveway. "The yard looks great, Evelyn," she said quietly, setting her dessert fork down. "And the car looks brand new." "Thank you, Heather," I replied with a warm, easy smile. "I take good care of what's mine." We didn't need to discuss the past. The boundary had been drawn clearly, solidly, and permanently. I had my freedom, my self-respect, and my home back, and no one would ever take the keys from my hands again.